Today marks the end of an era for BBC News, as the last network news bulletins are broadcast from Television Centre. It's a moment for a bit of nostalgia, not just for those of us who've worked there, but also for all of us who've grown up watching BBC News bulletins from there, because the building has been sold to redevelopment and the newsroom is moving to new broadcasting house in central London.
Well, in just a few moments we will be talking to the presenter Angela Rippon about some of her memories of Television Centre. But first, Nick Hyam has been looking back at some of the highlights of more than 40 years of BBC reporting from the building that's affectionately known to staff as TVC.
July the 5th, 1954, and the BBC's first ever television news bulletin goes on the air. There was no presenter, just a disembodied voice, and there were no moving pictures. But it was a start.
The French Union and Viet Minh representatives agreed on the subjects to be discussed.
The programmes came from Alexandra Palace in North London. From here, the nation first heard news of triumphs and tragedies.
Over to the newsroom.
The death of John F. Kennedy happened in Dallas at 12:25.
It's now feared that nearly 200 lives were lost when the coal tip at Aberfan near Merthyr Tydfil slid forward today. It engulfed an infant school and a row of houses.
And it was at Ali Pali that the BBC first started broadcasts in colour.
Good evening. And tonight, in France,
well, sort of.
8 o'clock.
But there was soon a new home for news. It had started literally as an architect's squiggle on an envelope. Built in the 1950s, Television Centre in West London was positively futuristic. News arrived in 1969.
This is BBC Television News.
Television news in those days was a macho business and involved an awful lot of smoking.
I would have thought there might have been some point in having him explain this.
The original news studios at Television Centre are still here. Reminders of a time when there was a lot less news, just 2 or 3 programmes a day, and it was technologically a lot simpler. But they're a shadow of their former selves. And the second studio, just across the way, well, that's been turned into a storeroom for old furniture.
3, 2, 1,
go out.
From these studios and their successors, the BBC covered history as it happened.
After an earlier confrontation down the end, which looked at the time like the kind of civil rights clash we knew from years ago.
I'm allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out, and I counted them all back.
Dawn, and as the sun breaks through the piercing chill of night on the plain outside Corham, it lights up a biblical famine, now in the 20th century.
15 years ago, new high-tech news studios opened at Television Centre. By now, news was broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Terrorists attacked the heart of America with catastrophic loss of life.
Bankruptcies, bailouts and trading bans triggered the most tumultuous week on world markets in living memory.
This summer has created so many heroes, although some stand out more than others.
Reporters risked their lives.
After 114 days, Alan Johnston emerged, weary but free, into the Gaza night.
Sometimes the news was trivial. Sometimes, frankly, rather dull.
In addition to its amendment, the Home Office has indicated it is willing to think again.
And sometimes the news programmes themselves made the news.
Where thousands of acres.
Get security. Get security.
Okay.
I
do apologise if you're hearing quite a lot of noise in this studio at the moment. I'm afraid that we have rather been invaded by some people. Television Centre was even bombed by the IRA. Title sequences have come and gone along with generations of presenters, reporters and off-screen staff. Now, television news is joining radio and the World Service in a new home in central London. Nick Hyam, BBC News, for the last time at Television Centre.
Well, I am delighted to say that we are joined now from Television Centre by one of the BBC's first ever female TV newsreaders, Angela Rippon. Angela, good morning to you, looking as poised and elegant as ever in those familiar surroundings on the Star Terrace of all places.
Absolutely. It was really very nostalgic actually for me, because when I drove in here this morning I realised it was almost 40 years ago that I first came into this building and saw this iconic donut, the one that's behind me there now, that wonderful wall there which says Television Centre on the side. I'd been working in regional television in the West Country, and I was coming up to London to be a news reporter for BBC Television News, and I still remember driving into what we all know affectionately as the Horseshoe here in front, driving up to the front, going into that building that was absolutely vibrant and alive and the very centre of everything that meant BBC television to the people of Great Britain, and thinking, I'm this little West Country mouse and I'm going to work for the greatest broadcasting organisation in the world in this very building.
It's really daunting, isn't it? It's almost like the first day at big school, isn't it, when you turn up and drive into TV Centre for the first time. It's impossible, I'm sure, but do you have any particular highlights from your working days there?
Well, my working days here, I mean, first of all, I was a news reporter, and of course the troubles in Northern Ireland were at their height, and we spent an awful lot of time, all of the reporters at Television News, going backwards and forwards to Northern Ireland. We had the oil crisis at that time, and I spent, I think, nearly 2 months in Northern Europe working on that. Lots of different news stories that I was involved in, but then, of course, they asked me in the late 1970s to become a news reader, and yes, there were outstanding stories. I covered the death of Airy Neve when he was blown up by a bomb in the car park at Parliament. The Jonestown massacre was one of mine. I announced when Pope John Paul became Pope, we were live on air, and I was able to say there for the very first time we've got our first sighting of the man who will be Pope John Paul. And I was also, though, I heard in that report there from Nick that he was talking about the lighter things that we did. It was also me that announced to the world who killed JR, so there was light and shade. There was light and shade in everything that we did in television news.
And of course we can't forget the fabulous moment when you danced with Morcambe and Wise.
No, well, that's the other great thing about this building, of course. You've got the donut behind us here. On my right is where we used to have, just over here on my right, are the big studio complexes, TC1, TC2, TC3, all those big studios where we did all the light entertainment programmes with people like Val Doonigan and Pet Clark and Nana Muscuri, and of course Morcambe and Wise, all the comedy programmes, the drama programmes that were done here. This place was absolutely alive and buzzing, and it's lovely for me to stand here now because on my left is what we know as the Spur, which used to be where Television News came from. On the right, the big television studios where all the big light entertainment programmes, including, of course, Morcambe and Wise, came from. And I find myself standing in the middle, as I have done, I think, throughout my career with 40 years with the BBC, of being in the middle of news and current affairs on one hand and light entertainment on the other.
Well, you stepped across both sides of it with enormous dexterity and aplomb, Angela. It's lovely of you to get up early to talk to us this morning. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. It's just so sad to be here and see this iconic building now just being deserted and abandoned. I think it's very sad for all of us who work in television.
Absolutely.
Angela, thank you very much indeed. It's interesting,
My
isn't
pleasure.
it? Everybody is quite sad about that today, but if you look at the building, it's not exactly the prettiest.
No.
Maybe it wasn't about the building, but about the people in